So tonight we're just going to go over the basics of human trafficking, awareness, just some information about it. And I'll tell you a little bit about my background here first. So a few things about me. This is my family. These are the two dogs you heard barking a little bit ago. This is my dog, Charlie. This is my daughter, Tootsie here. And this is my two kids, my husband, Mark, who passed away in May this year. But I still want to include him on my picture still. So he's still up there. I have worked in many different fields. My original passion and love was EMS. Been doing working in the medical field for over 25 years. I started as an EMT first responder in 1992, got my paramedic in took the class in 96 and graduated in 7. Became a registered nurse in 2011. So I've worked several different areas in both of those fields. Miami County EMS, Johnson County MedAct here in the county. I also had a massage business off and on over the years, kind of something to do in my days off. Don't currently have an up and running business. I closed that down when I got my most recent job, which I'll get to here in a second. I did work at Olathe Medical Center in the ER for a long time, and that's where I first kind of started with the human trafficking. I developed a policy for the hospital on what to do, how to recognize victims, and then what to do when somebody does recognize a victim. My current job, I started last October, and that's with Johnson County Community College as an assistant professor in the paramedic program. So now I'm in education and loving every minute of it. So I'm back where I took my paramedic program back in 1996 and thoroughly enjoying that. So behind all that I do is my faith, and a lot of what brought me to doing this particular subject and really learning more about it and having a passion for helping these individuals. So disclaimers, I am not an expert. I'm just on a journey and would like to share that with you. So I had my first class many years ago on human trafficking and just really felt a passion to do something about it. I don't claim to be an expert in the area, but I have learned a lot. And so I'm just sharing that information. Know ahead of time, it is a heavy topic. If you need to step away at any point, feel free to do that. For those of you that might be seeing this on a recording, feel free to pause, walk away from it. It is difficult. On the side there, it's the little joke about Germans not having enough humor. I am German, but I don't think there's any humor adequate enough to make this a more lighthearted subject. So this will not be the fun, lighthearted, joking kind of presentation, but it's very important nonetheless. I do talk fast, so hopefully you catch what I say, and I will try to keep myself as slow as possible. So what is human trafficking? And as you can see, there's a lot of words on this page. This is all the legal definitions of human trafficking. Important to note are these 3 words. Force, fraud, or coercion is used to control victims, whether that's in commercial sex acts, labor services against their will. So we do have labor trafficking, which is involuntary servitude, slavery, forcing somebody to work against their will, taking their money, not letting them have their wages, things like that. And then there's sex trafficking, which is what we are dealing more with, but we like to discuss all of it. And that's, again, with the force, fraud, or coercion, and as you see there, recruitment, harboring, transportation, blah, 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 for commercial sex acts. And that's really what we're talking about. And that can be, so force, fraud, or coercion has to be proven if the person is over 18. If they are not 18 years of age, it is automatically sex trafficking. They cannot agree to any kind of sex act under the age of 18. Commercial sex act. So it is automatically considered illegal if they're under age 18. Up here, you will see in America, North America, the majority of trafficking is for sexual exploitation, 71%, 24% for forced labor, and 5% for other purposes. And that was really mainly committing other illegal acts of some sort. causing somebody to rob a bank or forcing them to do things. It's kind of random stuff. So mostly we're talking about sexual exploitation. Important to note that human trafficking is always an exploitation of vulnerability. And that's really kind of gets to the root of the problem and how they succeed in bringing individuals into a situation where they're able to be trafficked. That vulnerability can be very different things, lack of money, lack of resources of some sort, shelter, whatever that vulnerability is, needing someone to be a family for them, not feeling like they have certain things is really what, excuse me, leads to the potential for them to be trafficked. A slightly more maybe simplified version of that definition, if you look at this particular demographic or slide here, if you take any one of the items in white from each of those columns, you have human trafficking. So it can be recruitment, transport, transfer, harboring, all of those, any one of those things by one of those means. So if it's just by coercion and for the purpose of sexual exploitation, you have human trafficking. As you'll see there, the other purposes, slavery, removal of organs, unfortunately, is also listed in there, prostitution, so on and so forth. But any one thing out of each of those columns, and you end up with human trafficking. And that's legally what they look at to define the things that would be included as a human trafficking situation. I like to point out, and this is something you may know, but for the longest time, it was very unclear for many people. I think as education has come out more and more about human trafficking, this is a little bit more understood. But a lot of times in the past, when you would discuss human trafficking, people were actually thinking what you were talking about was human smuggling. Humans, and I did too. When my pastor, I remember at church, first talked about human trafficking, I was like, well, there's not much of that going on in Kansas. Like, we're not bringing people in from other countries much, blah, blah, blah. How would I do anything about that here? So I had that, that very, I remember having that thought that that's what trafficking was. Human smuggling is a crime against a border, whereas human trafficking is the crime against the person. So human smuggling, it does include those who consent to that. They may agree or even have a contract with someone to be brought across a border. Whereas trafficking is the crime against the person and the victims don't consent to that. It can be for exploitation, as we said, for many reasons. It's a crime against their rights. It can occur domestically with people held in captivity inside their own country. So there's not a border involved in trafficking. And where those two kind of become confused is the fact that, or can cross over, I should say, someone may be smuggled into the country, say from Mexico, where they agree, they may even pay the person to bring them into the country. And when they get into this country, then oftentimes their smuggler becomes their trafficker and says, in order to stay in this country, now you're going to have to do these specific acts in order to maintain, to live here, in order to be able to stay where you want to stay, provide shelter for them, food for them. But they won't allow them to do that without providing, whether it's sexual acts or forced labor. So sometimes they do cross over, but they are two different things. When we talk about sexual exploitation, that's abuse of a position of vulnerability or power for sexual purposes. And it can be for many different things. So types of sexual exploitation, survival sex, when we talk about that's providing sexual acts in order to be able to live where you live, to be given food. It's really in order to stay where you live or are fed, you have to do that in order to be able to stay there. And that can be seen within families, unfortunately, with a spouse. And then, like, as I already described, kind of when somebody has been smuggled into the country, that's fairly common. Other types of exploitation, pornography, escort services, online exploitation, which is unfortunately a booming business. Strip clubs or dancing, prostitution, sextortion, which is the practice of extorting money or sexual favors from someone by threatening to reveal evidence of sexual activity, which is they've been videotaped or something like that, and then that's threatened and held against them. Nude pictures, phone sex, rape, molestation, and massage can be included in that as well. So there's lots of different potential avenues, unfortunately, for people to become victimized in this way. The scope. So I started, and this is probably actually more like 4 years ago now when I started kind of researching this, and they talked about human trafficking affecting 20.9 million people globally at that point. Last year, when I reassessed those statistics from the same agency, it was 40.3 million people. So it has grown exponentially. I do think part of that is more awareness, more people that are willing to come forward and say that they're being victimized. I think there's a lot more. The numbers have increased somewhat because of that, but I do also think that it's grown in and of itself. The Kansas City metro area has been known as a hub. We have both I-70 and I-35, and those allow for movement of persons very quickly and easily across the country in both directions. And so we do see this area as a hub. Important to note, and part of the reason that I got into this, 88% of the victims are seen by a healthcare provider during their captivity, and 63% of them were seen in an emergency department. So this is an area where a lot of victims are found and recognized and have the opportunity to maybe get out of that situation. So it's really important that our medical personnel in the area know about this because they have a really good chance of seeing these individuals. Just a little bit about situations that have been identified. The numbers, as you can see there, 2015, and this is Polaris Project, which is the National Human Trafficking Hotline. The total number of situations, and again, this is last year's statistics. I haven't seen this year's come out yet. 63,380 individuals that overall had been identified through the trafficking hotline. And you can see there from 2015 where they had 5,700 up to 11,500 calls and victims during that time frame. So the numbers are exponentially increasing globally and locally. A little bit, I thought these were interesting. These are from the United Nations documentation. That's where I get a lot of my statistics on this. So this is some global numbers, but if you look, we're in the Americas, the pink line here. And this is the number of people convicted of trafficking since 2007. And somewhere around 2014, we went right off the charts, whereas everyone else is still on, which I was unfortunate to see that. And then again, number of trafficking victims, we went off the chart somewhere in 2012. So it's very definitely an issue in the Americas, and sad to see that our numbers are that high. But I thought those were pretty interesting charts. The other things that I've gotten from there, 65% are adult females. Then the next number, unfortunately, is females that are under 18, which is at 20%, and then adult males, and then youth males. So obviously this is related to, because of the sexual exploitation is much more common in women, and the fact that women are more willing to come forward with that. I think probably the male numbers are lower than they actually are because of the individuals not necessarily wanting to come forward. Origins of trafficking, which I thought was rather interesting. You know, you feel like maybe a lot of these victims are coming in, being brought in, smuggled in from other countries. And I did talk about how that does happen. And 9% of those are coming from Central America, Caribbean. Said that wrong. Oops, go back there a little bit. But 76% of the victims are actually from within North America that are being victimized. So we are victimizing our own individuals here within the country. This was the prevalence chart in 2019. And you can see a nice big red hot spot right there in the Kansas City metro area. As expected, some of the outlying areas are some of the more, the coasts are a little bit hotter, but we do definitely have our spots. You can tell where, Denver and some of those cities are. Kansas City's right here. So you can see some of the bigger cities where it's more of an issue. Not to completely bore you with statistics. So here, I do have the Kansas, Missouri statistics on numbers of contacts and cases. This was all through the National Human Trafficking Hotline. I don't know why exactly that Missouri is so much higher than Kansas, but we do see that there's a lot higher numbers over there. This was a chart that was made originally by Allison Phillips, who was at the time working for the Criminal Justice Department at UMKC, has since gone in to work at the District Attorney's Office in Missouri. And then I kind of updated it from there with a little bit more numbers in 2020. But you can just see some of the different agencies in the area, the numbers of victims and how they've increased. Children's is at the top there, and I think it's really one of the more interesting ones. So in 2015, they had 2 victims. In 2020, they recognized 55 victims, 62 in 2019. And I think a lot of that is awareness. You'll see Heidi Olson, who is their main proponent for their human trafficking policy there. Then I worked a lot with her. You'll see her in a later video, but she has really made awareness a huge thing at Children's Mercy. And I think that's why they're able to assist so many victims. Sad that we're seeing that many in the youth population, but good that that's happening. And I have worked with several of the different hospitals, and so a lot of them are working on similar policies. How does this relate to prostitution? So, you kind of, it seems to maybe blur or cross lines, but the Attorney General's office in Kansas has actually removed the word prostitution from any of the Kansas statutes. So it was just difficult to see them as victims with that specific terminology. They now consider prostitutes actually victims of human trafficking. It's very rare that you have an individual that is choosing to do that and not by desperation or because of some vulnerability in their life. And so they are really recognizing that more as that they are trafficking victims. The majority of women in prostitution do not have a choice. Many of them have a pimp. They are controlled by that person. 90% of prostitution involves a pimp controlling the individual. That was one study. Another said that 99% of females in prostitution were either minors controlled by a trafficker, or that last one, compelled by some element of desperation. There's no little girl that wakes up in the morning that, going into first grade with the lovely little signs like we're seeing with people going back to school that says, I want to be a prostitute when I grow up. There's generally an element of desperation there, and not necessarily by their choice are they stuck in that position. Where is this happening? It's happening anywhere and everywhere. But here's some of the more common places where we see that. Sex trafficking, I highlighted some there. Foster care is a major issue. There unfortunately are foster care parents that get into the business to create victims. And that's unfortunate. The other thing that happens is children that are in foster care run away from homes that they're in or don't care for their particular environment. They run away and then they get stuck in a position where they become victims. The other online exploitation has become very large. I mentioned private residences there. There are girls that are trafficked from their very own homes. We had a victim with another agency that I work with that was trafficked out of her own home. Somehow they got something on her that they were holding against her, and she would get on line in the middle of the night and perform acts online when her parents were, 100 feet away in the next room. and they did not know about it. So it can happen anywhere. It's an unfortunate circumstance when that happens, obviously, but we just need to be aware that it's not just specific areas or situations that we think of. It could be anywhere. Labor trafficking, there's some areas listed there that we may think of. Nursing, because of that, my background, I mentioned that one. There was actually in California, a trafficking ring that was broken up where they were, they had certified nurses assistants or CNAs in their employ, and they were keeping all of their wages from them, having them go out and work in different agencies and then keeping all of their wages. That's a photo from an actual advertisement in Kansas City. I don't think that girl on there is old enough to be doing massage on her own as a business. She looks very young. We call those illicit massage parlor businesses. You will hear occasionally about them being raided in the area. It is estimated that there's between 80 and 100 of those in our metro area at any given time. These numbers on this side of the screen were the numbers between 2017 and 2019 of how many of those there were. I actually just moved out of Olathe. I live in Lenexa now, but I was in Olathe, and that is where my latest massage business was. I don't know if that number of 23 there is because they're really good at breaking them up or because we have that many down there. I hope that it's because they've tracked that many and shut them down. But that's a high number there. And then Kansas City being 22, it's really surprising to me that Olathe is that high. But I have seen some of them, and it's unfortunate. One of the areas where this takes place is the internet. And it is very much a booming business, unfortunately. I have the picture over here on the side, shows the surface web. That's where we, search Google and find all those things. There's the deep web, and this is a good area. This is where our protected information is, our banking information, government resources, things like that we want to be somewhat hidden. Unfortunately, underneath that is the dark web, and that's where all the hackers are, the illegal porn sites, other illegal things that are going on online live there in the dark web. So I always kind of, people will ask me about specific things with social media, things like that, how to protect children, how to protect people that you know. Just a few of the things I will tell people. Social media accounts, any of these can be hacked. There's not a safe social media site. There's not a safe social media account or website. Anything could be hacked at any time. And you just need to be aware that that is a possibility. Pictures, I think it's always important to tell kids, they think their Snapchat photos disappear, but they're saved to the hard drive of the phone, actually. And there are apps that are developed that when you click on something will actually go into your phone and pull all of those photos off of there. I always tell people if you recycle or exchange phones, those can be downloaded. So you need to make sure that you're following appropriate things to completely erase everything on the phone. And I honestly wouldn't know how to do that, but I would find somebody to do that. I have a ton of old phones in here because I refuse to recycle them for that very reason. I haven't figured it out yet. Anything on the dark web is concerning. Craigslist has been known for trafficking. Backpage was one of the ones that was very common for trafficking at one point. That has been taken down, which is a blessing and a curse. We obviously don't want that happening, but police agencies were able to go there and quickly find individuals that were doing this. And so it made it a little bit easier for them to access. And once one is taken down, another takes its place, or 20 take its place. So it's still going on in the dark web, and it's just a matter of constantly having police individuals looking for those specific things. Obviously on pornography sites, it's happening. Online internet gaming is concerning. Fortnite, you see the little news clipping there. My son is on Fortnite. The main things I tell my son, who's 16, first of all, anybody on your social media should be somebody that you know and see and talk to on a regular basis. You should not ever friend anybody that you don't know personally. You shouldn't talk to anybody that you don't know personally. Sometimes he forgets that. I did catch him once on Fortnite talking to somebody that he didn't know, and I shut that down. And I think it's just a matter of making sure that it's, you know, constantly checking and constantly talking to kids about these things. And, you know, with social media these days, in a world where everyone is your friend, who can you trust? And so really with my son, it's been what is the definition of a friend? Because it's not just somebody that friends you on an app. It's somebody that you actually know, talk to, have their cell phone number, and speak to on a regular basis. So I kind of emphasize those things with my son. Social media does put out that vulnerability to the world. So social media posts that will draw the attention of a trafficker are things like, nobody gets me, I'm sick of being single, I'm ugly, my life sucks, my parents don't trust me, you know, things like that. They're opening themselves up to potential, showing their vulnerabilities and allowing others to potentially exploit those. And a trafficker's strategic response to things are those, such as, I understand you, I love you, you're beautiful, I'll encourage you to show your body, use your body, I'll make your life better. You know, all of these things that make them feel included and loved and wonderful and beautiful. Social media has definitely created more vulnerability, and the fact that, you know, everybody sees the best side of people, and they don't always see the rough sides. And so when somebody is struggling or having a hard time, they're much more vulnerable in that situation. Going to talk a little bit as well about pornography and how that plays into this. And here's a video that I think really describes it well. And I'm also founder and president of. Pause that for a second. Are you guys able to hear that?
A little bit.
Okay.
Can you go the volume a little higher?
That's what I always run into in this. Let's see if on here, turn this all the way up.
Culturally framed, which is a non-profit pornography as the public health crisis of the digital age. You know, I lecture all over the world. I lecture in colleges. What you see in the beginning is that the men, the hostility is literally coming off. You can feel it. They're bristling with hostility towards me because they're obviously thinking, you know, what does this middle-aged feminist know about my life and about pornography? And then I start to talk, and you see their body, you see their bodies change. You see the hostility kind of seep out of them because nobody before has ever explained to them what pornography does. And they are hungry for this. And at the end, they are lining up, some of them in tears, begging for help to get off pornography. Now, the problem is that pornography is a kind of stealth public health crisis. I think a lot of people, especially over the age of 35, do not understand the world of young people. They do not understand what it means to grow up in a society saturated by pornography. I mean, when you look back at our sort of father's generation, or even my generation, how did boys get to pornography? They found their father Playboy, Penthouse, and they had limited access to pornography. Now, that was sexist and bad enough as it was. But really, you look back at that today with a kind of nostalgia, because today what happens is when they put porn into Google, they get catapulted into a world of sexual violence, degradation, dehumanization. They get catapulted into a world that I think for many, they had no idea this is what they were going to get into. And I think it traumatizes them. I think it really has a terrible impact on the way they think about themselves, the way they think about sexuality, intimacy, and connection. And really, you know, when you think about what sex is about, we call it making love. In porn, it's actually making hate. He makes hate to her. All the emotions that one links to hate, you know, degradation, fear, violence, disgust, all of those things are what he shows towards her. So this is the introduction into the world of sex of the young boy. And so when you think about effects, when it affects the boys, then it affects the girls. And the reason for that is that the boys think the girls are going to behave like the girls and the women in pornography. And so pornography really sets you up for disappointment. Now, people who are often criticize pornography are called anti-sex, to which I would argue that if you want to be pro-sex, you have to be anti-porn. You can't be pro-porn and pro-sex. You have to pick one. And I think those of us who are against pornography are against pornography because we can't stand what it does to sex. We can't stand to see the way in which it reduces sex to an industrial toxic product, which is exactly what pornography does. The free porn sites were designed as a way to get young boys into pornography. So by the time they get their credit card, they're addicted and they're using it. It's a perfect business model. And I don't know what kind of adult men these boys are going to grow up into, because we have blocked them so much by introducing them to pornography at such an early age. We have allowed the pornographers to come in and to hijack our sexuality into a sexuality that is predatory, that is violent, that is disconnected, and that reduces humans to just basically sex objects, men and women. So this is why pornography is a public health crisis. It comes from the individual and radiates out to families, communities, to the culture. That is why we have to be bold, we have to be courageous, and we have to make a stand and say, not on our watch are you going to hijack our children's sexuality.
So I apologize if you can't hear that very well. I turned all of my volumes up, and every time I tried to do something else to fix it, it stopped the video. I can send those out to you as well after this, and so you can watch them. But it talks about just how
we got all three from Rachel.
Oh, you did? Okay. I may have different ones in here than the previous presentation, but yeah. So I'll make sure that that you have all of them. But just has some good information there about how pornography can affect what to me is important is how it affects what boys expect, what men expect in their relationships as adults if they have been involved in porn at a young age. So the impact of pornography, on the side there, I think a lot of people don't realize that trafficking is happening on porn sites. A lot of times what they think is a woman voluntarily being on there or a man voluntarily being on there. They're actually under being forced or coerced into doing that. They may have started voluntarily, that may have changed over time. Anytime that it features children, it's obviously illegal and it's considered trafficking. But also pornography is the primary gateway to sex trafficking. It fuels demand, and that's the huge thing. The only reason we have human trafficking is because there's a demand for it. There's a demand for women and men to behave in ways that pornography promotes. So it encourages and promotes and normalizes violence during sex, perpetuates the abuse and trafficking. It is definitely a risk factor for exploitation, and it normalizes and desensitizes the victims. Know that 88% of explicit photos are stolen. Remember when I discussed earlier how they're pulled off of phones, things like that. So a lot of the majority of explicit photos online are actually stolen. Porn sites, this was a study in 2013 that showed at that time porn sites were getting more visitors each month than Netflix, Amazon, and Twitter combined. That number is outrageous to me because I think about how many times in a week I get on Netflix or Amazon. Now, I don't know if those were as popular in 2013, probably not, but still that's a lot of numbers there. And then unfortunately, the porn is mostly being streamed on PlayStation and Xbox. Teenage boys often have those in their room, and they're able to get on to them in the middle of the night, access the internet, and get onto things that we probably wish they weren't on. That we do wish they weren't on. In 2018, there were 33.5 billion visits to the most popular free pornography site. You can see some of the other statistics there. 45% of sexually exploited women said that porn was made of them while they were being sold for sex. Obviously, we talked about it. It fuels demand. The violence perpetuates abuse and trafficking. I think a lot of that's the same from the previous slide. Sorry about that. And the trafficking does happen on mainstream porn sites. In 2016, Pornhub revealed its videos were watched 92 billion times that year. Pornhub is one of the most popular free sites. It starts free, I should say, and then they start charging people. It has an average of 64 million daily visitors. And it would take 524,000 plus years to watch all of the videos that are on there. I'm probably on government watch lists, but I did pull this up. This was the first page when you even Google Pornhub, and it lets you see that you can have any sort of category you want, which is really, that to me was just very sad and very humbling to see that that is out there and available. Made me even more aware of just how easy it would be for my son to get a hold of that. So, and of course, they do have a free app for that, which is unfortunate. And then in 2020, when we had COVID hit, Pornhub actually opened their site free to everyone for, I don't remember how long, because, you know, people needed something to do. It's really unfortunate what all goes on there. This is Heidi Olson. She's the one I mentioned earlier. She's sexual assault nurse examiner and coordinator at Children's Mercy. She's the one that's brought about a lot of human trafficking awareness in the area, and especially for children. And she is in this video that I'm going to show.
I think people think that watching pornography is okay because they say, well, everybody has consented to it and they're all paid actors and they're consenting adults, so it's fine. But the reality is, and I've heard this from survivors, and what they really want all porn consumers to know is that when you are watching pornography, you actually have no way of knowing if you're watching somebody being raped or voluntarily engaging in that act.
Pornography is really prostitution on screen. The traffickers are the same, the pimps are the same, the women and girls and men and boys are the same victims that are being sold in the sex trade.
There isn't pornography over here, prostitution over here, and trafficking over there. They're interlinked.
The most interesting study I read is one that did brain scans of men while they were watching pornography. And they wanted to see what areas of the brain light up when men look at porn. It's the part of the brain that deals with objects, not people. And why that is so devastating is the more we dehumanize someone, the more possible it is to commit violence against them.
When you see someone being really brutalized in pornography, that really has to be done to someone in order to film that. Sometimes we could call something sex trafficking, but if you photograph it, then it becomes pornography. And if it happens on a date, then it's rape. When in fact, we're really talking about the same kind of sexual violence and exploitation.
In our society, we glamorize the issue of trafficking. We glamorize pimping. We think that a pimp is someone that's cool. Like we'll have shows like Pimp My Ride or Pimp My House, and it appears to make something look good. But what is the reality of a pimp? A pimp is someone that abuses women, that rapes women. And is that something that we want to associate something positive with? My trafficker was someone that I met while crossing the street. He didn't say to me that, you know, I am the big bad pimp. You're going to come with me. I'm going to beat you and abuse you and do all these things to you. He was very nice in his approach. I had no idea that he was a trafficker until I shared with him, hey, I needed money to go back to school. And he said, I'll help you.
He grooms her, tells her he loves her, builds a connection, builds a dependence on him. And then he says, if you love me, you'll not only sleep with me, you'll take care of my friends.
Almost all of them have had pictures or videos taken of them, whether it's been sold as pornography or not.
Pornography is used to desensitize the individuals involved in the sex trade. it is used to normalize violence and reduce the individual that's being bought to what's on that screen.
Pornography was oftentimes used as some sort of advertising for their sexual abuse.
Pretty much every trafficking victim I've ever seen, pornography has been created of them. These are 12, 13, 14-year-olds. It is considered sex trafficking anytime a child is being sold for any type of monetary value in the United States. So when people say child prostitute, that's absolutely an incorrect term for them. It is always sex trafficking.
We've done some recoveries of young people where they were lured by modeling and eventually end up in a situation where they were forced to make pornographic films.
Trafficking is a symptom of a problem. It's a supply response to a demand problem. And so if we can address that demand problem, we can really solve a lot of these other issues.
I really wish that people who watch porn knew more about that, because I think they believe that they're engaging in this activity in a very passive way, and they're like, oh, I'm doing it in the privacy of my own home, and this is just a video that I'm watching, and they're not associating it with the fact that pornography is very often the filmed rape of sex trafficking victims.
When you look at pornography, what we're seeing is a cultural acceptance of that type of commercial sexual exploitation. What we don't think about is who are the actors, what are the elements that are contributing to this multi-billion-dollar sex industry.
I think people.
So they talked a lot about, well, not a lot, but about the demand issue in there. And there's, this kind of talks a little bit about that. The other main thing I like to bring about from that video is the study that showed that the parts of the brain that lit up when watching porn were about objects and not people. And I think that really goes to the heart of what people think about their trafficking victims, is that they are objects and not a person. And that's where it really becomes, people become very desensitized to that. This talks a little bit about the demand. We haven't had a ton of research done here in the Kansas City area, but this was an Arizona study done back in 2013. That was a long time ago, but 14.5% of the male population over the age of 18 in this area was online shopping for sex. At that point, that would have been about 106,000 people. And if that many people are in looking to purchase sex, how many people are being sold? And, you know, it just really goes to the numbers. And if there weren't a demand, there wouldn't be the need for this. And so while it's very important to do what agencies are doing, like Rachel's are doing, where we're helping those victims and the survivors, you know, it's also, we've got to realize that it's not ever going to go away until the demand is taken care of. And, you know, so there's not as much that we can do on that demand side, but when we can support agencies that are working on that, that's always important as well. There was a sting operation in 2009 between the Independence Police Department and FBI, and they ran decoy ads offering young girls for sex. They got over 500 phone calls in the first 24 hours. So demand is super high, and it's definitely a demand-driven business. We're going to switch and talk a little bit about characteristics of both the trafficker and the victim or survivor. The trafficker, typically age 19 to 45. Their average education is 9.3 years. So only half of them have completed high school or a GED. The grand majority of them have a history of drug or alcohol abuse, also have a criminal record. And the majority of them grew up with domestic violence in the home. And that's something to also remember. And it was very hard for me to learn and recognize and understand that the traffickers are also victims as well. And we want to hate them, but needing to realize that they also have been victimized most likely in their life, and that those individuals need help as well. That's not what we're here for, but praying that they do get the help and that they need in order to get out of that lifestyle. is also something to think about. And that was taught to me. It was hard to recognize and understand, but I did have one victim that I'll kind of talk about her some, but she was actually trafficked by her husband. She was the first victim I took care of at a Latham Med Center. And her husband had abused her for many years, and then started to traffic her. And I might talk a little bit more about that, but it was really important to her when I recognized that he probably also had some major issues in his life, and that we could pray about him and pray for him as well, that he got the help he needed. And that meant a lot to her. Hard to say, because I really just wanted to hate him with all the things that he had done. But I think it was important to recognize that. And it was important for me to understand that when she spoke about that, and how important it was for her, that I was willing to pray for him as well and wanted him to get help. So something to think about there. That's not necessarily an easy thing, but something that we also need to realize that they've been victimized. It is a profitable business. And that's why they stay in it. So individuals with not even a GED or a high school diploma are making $220,000 to $500,000 a year with just 3 victims. I listened to a speaker from California. Every girl out there makes them $300,000 a year. So if they have 5 girls, they've got $1.5 million per year that they're making. That's pretty healthy salary, and would be hard to walk away from, I imagine. And so I think that's, that obviously leads to another, reason why this is continuing so much. As I talked about, online trafficking is huge, and I hate this particular instance. But it's important to bring up on just how significant this can be. In Germany in 2017, 59 men paid $7,500 each to watch live streaming of a toddler being violated, which is horrific. But they made $450,000 in just 10 minutes. So there's a high demand for that online. That's not something that men are going to be able to go out and find locally. So online has provided another avenue for these kind of horrible things to take place, and make it more anonymous for the individual participating. Disguises. The trafficker will use several different kinds of disguises so that their victim doesn't realize what's going on. They'll start out maybe as a provider. Like I talked about earlier, they're going to exploit vulnerabilities. So if somebody is in need of shelter or food or money, they're going to take care of those needs. They may become a protector. They may use physical power or intimidation to protect you, but also then to control you. A promiser, they're going to promise you great things, an amazing job, lifestyle, like they talked earlier in one of the videos. Girls that get into modeling, but then actually end up in something else. They may promise all these amazing, wonderful things. They're a pretender. They pretend to be something that they're not. So whether they're their boyfriend or a big sister or dad, whatever is missing in someone's life, they're going to try to fill that role and become that person for them. And lastly, they become a punisher. They'll use violence and threats to control. When other 4 disguises are exhausted, they almost always turn to this this way of controlling them. Unfortunately, traffickers are not a case of stranger danger. 48% were family members, 28% were the spouse or partner of the victim, and others included family, friends, employers, very rarely strangers. And you can see in this other diagram here at the bottom, that was another study, showed immediate family was 36%, boyfriends 27%, only 9% were strangers. And unfortunately, that's too often the case. This was a study or a newspaper article from 2018 where a mother accepted money and cocaine in exchanging for letting men sexually assault her 14-year-old daughter, who had the mental capacity of a 2 to 3-year-old. And a lot of times, unfortunately, drugs or needs of such are what drive people to do this. The particular victim I was talking about earlier, her husband was selling her in order to get money for drugs. And she was actually, they were from Missouri, but he brought her over here to Johnson County where he could sell her out and make more money because people are richer over here. Unfortunate situation there. Here's some of the vulnerable populations, specific people that have those vulnerabilities to be exploited. The homeless or runaways, immigrants, victims of abuse, disabilities or mental illness, impoverished, hungry, poor, in debt, all those things that we talked about with vulnerabilities. Unfortunately, the children in foster care, like I mentioned earlier, 60% of the child victims that the FBI recovered were children from foster care. So unfortunately, that's the situation, but those are some of the vulnerable populations for this particular situation. But when we talk about that, it could also be my child, your child, or the child next door. This is Teresa Flores, and this is the book that she wrote about her situation. The true story of an American teen that was trafficked. And I do have a video of her next. And I don't think this is one that Rachel probably sent out, so I will get it sent out, but we'll go ahead and listen to her here a little bit. And I kind of start in the middle of the video because it's a very long video.
Just to show you that I came from a normal family. I had a mom and a dad. I wasn't beaten.
And that one's very quiet, so maybe it talks about, it's a good video to watch, but I'll send that out so you can hear it better. But she was a very typical American teen and got stuck in a really bad situation. I'll skip over that and let you watch that later. Seasoning grooming. So how do these victims become, how do these traffickers get them desensitized and willing to be victimized in such a situation? The trafficker often targets a victim. They look for those vulnerabilities and then they start desensitizing them. First with maybe emotional manipulation, gaining their trust, giving them special attention or gifts, filling their needs. They may treat a child as if they're older. Some of these things we've kind of already talked about, but then they start to isolate them. They create times to be alone with the victim. They became a major person in that victim's life. Eventually they start crossing physical boundaries in public. Eventually this leads to maintaining control of them with threats, violence, blackmail, drugs. That's another huge component of control. Physical and sexual abuse, changing their name, and then they take away their money and resources. So one of the ways in the hospital that we would recognize victims is if they didn't have their identification with them, didn't have resources, maybe didn't know how old they were, things like that. When they would look to somebody else to answer questions, that was a huge red flag. We'll talk about some of those, but they take away things that then allow them to be more of a victim where they're not able to get out of the situation as easy. Unfortunately, this seasoning grooming is probably the easier way that people end up in such a situation. The other, some are groomed, but some are broken. The breaking process may look like any of these things: gang rape, gang sodomy. They may be locked in a closet for days without food, filmed in proactive and degrading porn and forced to watch it. They may be burned, beaten, electrocuted, verbally degraded, psychologically manipulated, drugged, branded. Often, once these people are broken in such a way, life's never the same. And there's often, when we talk about recidivism rate, individuals will go back to this situation because they don't feel worthy. And it could be for many reasons. One of the things that's described there as an example is herpes. They may have gotten herpes, and every outbreak of their herpes is a reminder that that they were victimized, or a reminder of the situation where that happened, or for their life, and then they feel not worthy, and they're willing to go back into the situation that they were in because they don't feel like they deserve anything better, which is very unfortunate. The characteristics of victims: average age of entry is 13 to 16 years old. Most are female. They're not likely to consider themselves as victims. Many of them don't know what human trafficking is. They don't understand it. They believe that this is just their life. This is how they live. This is how they make money. This is how they're taken care of. So they don't often even understand what that means. They exhibit behaviors such as being fearful or anxious. They may be subordinate or hypervigilant. They avoid eye contact, flat affect, or disengaged. They're often reluctant to explain injuries or speak on their own behalf. They'll often have tattoos, marks, or insignias that display ownership. Some of the more common ones are crowns, which you see there on the wrist in the middle picture, a money maker, or may say money maker. They may have dollar signs, barcodes, as you see in a picture there, or the name of their trafficker may be tattooed on them. And again, you can see how this could make them feel like they're not worthy of getting out of the situation. They are owned by somebody else, and that's just what their life is. This down here at the bottom shows just the age at which people got involved or became a victim of sex or labor trafficking. And right there is 15 to 17. So this is labor trafficking. There's still kind of a bump at that age, but obviously sex trafficking is just huge in that teenage range. And as you know, teenagers are insecure and feel like their parents are the worst people in the world, all of those things that allow them to be very vulnerable populations. This is something you might notice in someone that maybe you know, but that some behavior would change in them. These are things to look for, and people just things that you might notice as a change in someone and be concerned about. A change in their behavior or language. They start dressing differently, whether it's hypersexual or extremely covering, nondescript. They may have expensive gifts such as nails, designer purses, clothes, track phones, etc., things that they wouldn't normally have. They might start skipping classes, tardiness, fatigue during school hours. That's again, those individuals that are being trafficked during the night will often be fatigued during the day. They may have an older boyfriend, girlfriend, or friends outside of their age range or their normal friend group. So red flags, things that we would look for in the hospital that would lead us to believe or be concerned about an individual for human trafficking. Someone is with them that talks for them, answers their questions for them. They may not be aware of their location, their personal information, such as date of birth, current address, date or time, which seems a little bit crazy that could happen. But we actually had one individual at the hospital where we asked her how old she was, and she looked at the person in the room to answer that question. She didn't know how old she was. And so that was a huge red flag. They may provide an inconsistent story or clinical, their presentation doesn't really correlate with the cause. Very similar to abuse situations. We see that where, they tell you it's a fall down the stairs, but their bruises and such wouldn't match that kind of a fall. Delay in presenting for care of injuries. So the injuries were old, or lack of care for previous injuries or medical conditions. And then, like I said, this is a huge one for us in the hospital, that they're not in possession of their personal documents, such as identification. So that was how we actually recognized the gal that I was talking about earlier. Her husband, when we asked about her identification, she said, "My husband has my driver's license," which we thought was a little bit odd. And they called me in to come in and talk to her. And sure enough, we found out that he was victimizing her in this way. They're not in control of their own money, or they're not being paid for their work, or wages are withheld. One of the other stories, gal here in Kansas City, and it was actually with KU. She's come in multiple times to KU, and I haven't gotten updated on this recently, but she was working for a roofing company. And the gal there tried to explain to her multiple times that she was being trafficked because they were keeping her money. And she said, "No, that's just how I make my money. That's how I live, is I work for roofing, and then they take care of me." And she couldn't understand that was actually trafficking and not the way that things are supposed to be. So a lot of times they get involved in this at a young age and don't realize that that's not the way things normally should be. Let me see if this video is any louder. This is another victim story yeah, that one's pretty quiet too. So I will send that out. That's a story about Rebecca Bender, and she was, it was a story that was interesting to me because she just kind of became a victim of someone that she thought was her boyfriend, that she had taken home to her parents, and they'd gotten, engaged or decided to live together and stay together. And it's just, it kind of just shows how these situations can happen when you think it just would be an impossibility. And then they get stuck in the situation. Some of the health indicators for victims, they may have physical, sexual abuse, medical neglect, or torture. They may show signs of severe weight loss, malnutrition, or loss of appetite. Most, if not all, are going to have some kind of reproductive issue, whether that's sexually transmitted infections, urinary tract infections, genital trauma, retained foreign bodies inside the vaginal area, repeated unwanted pregnancies, forced abortions, and a great majority, if not all of them, are going to have mental health issues, anxiety, depression, PTSD. And I bring this up when I talk to medical individuals, especially because a lot of times when we see someone come in and they're there for a mental health issue, we aren't evaluating to see whether there's something else going on. And so it's really important for medical individuals to realize that while their presenting problem may be a mental health issue, there may be more behind it. And often their signs and symptoms are more severe due to a delay in seeking care. And so as we're taking care of these individuals, at the reintegration level, hopefully most of these medical concerns have been taken care of, but a lot of the mental health issues will remain. And there will be a lot of working through those situations and those particular concerns and issues. Barriers to disclosure. So I've talked a little bit, kind of highlighted on this a little bit, but why wouldn't people tell you about this? When I first got involved in this, I really thought this was going to be a situation where we were going to recognize it. We're going to talk to them. They're going to be like, yep, I'm ready to get some help, and they're going to get out. That was my idealistic, as my husband would have called it, my rose-colored glasses, where the world works in the best way possible, but that doesn't really happen. Many of these individuals have trauma bonds, so that's where they gain their acceptance and love, and it's very hard for them to leave those individuals. Most of them have some fear of retaliation. They're being blackmailed or threatened with personal injury. Often that personal injury isn't for them, it's for family members. Their family members are threatened. They're going to kill their brother, their sister, their just any individual in their life. Often, like I said, with blackmail, videos have been made of them, pictures have been taken of them. They're threatened that they will be sent to their parents, to their loved ones, whatever that is. So there's a lot of ways in which they're blackmailed. Shame or guilt leads them to not want to come forward. They're ashamed of what's happened. Isolation, they tend to be up at night and sleep all day. So they're isolated from a lot of the world in that way. They are brainwashed. Often they're afraid of law enforcement. Deportation may be a concern for some, but the other thing is that they may have become perpetrators. So there are levels in these organizations, and they will bring people in. They will traffic them. At some point, though, they may turn them into someone that brings other individuals in. There's an unfortunate term for those. They're often called the bottom bitch, which I hate to say, but that's the terminology they use. And that is the person that has been trafficked most likely in the past and has now become a perpetrator. They are utilized to bring other women in. It's easier to victimize women by another woman. It's easier to get them to comply from another woman. And so it kind of becomes this level. And so they may be concerned of law enforcement because they have become a perpetrator of the situation. Often there's threat, like I said, to harm to family members or friends. They have a lack of knowledge regarding assistance and resources. They don't know how to get help. They don't know where to get help. They don't know that what their situation is illegal and that they can get help for that. Often there's cultural and language barriers. We emphasize in the hospitals that we make sure that we have some way to translate for any of these individuals, because we don't want their family or friends or whoever it is that's in the room with them, often their trafficker, answering questions for them. So it's sometimes hard for them to get around those language barriers. They often really don't have transportation, or their movement's very controlled. Another individual that I helped take care of, she was actually a victim out of Wichita. And she was brought up here to service individuals up here, and her baby was back in Wichita. And she actually, they did not think she would leave in that situation. She did. And she sought help while she was here. And then we worked to get her baby back to her from Wichita. But their movement's very controlled so that they don't feel like they have a way to get out of that situation. And unfortunately, it's often that their kids are being threatened in those situations. Breaking through the barriers. Are we going to rescue them? No, but can we intervene? Yes. And I talk about this with healthcare individuals, especially because, like I said, I had the rose-colored glasses where I felt like, oh, we're going to be able to help these people. We're going to rescue them. Everything's going to be great. But any intervention that we make, and we have to realize as we're working through these individuals, whether we're in their crisis situation, whether they're in recovery, whether they're in reintegration, there's always the possibility that they will go back to that situation. But any intervention, any help that we provide them is getting them a step closer to getting out of that for good. And so this is really more applicable to some of the healthcare, but we're not here to rescue them. We're here to intervene on their behalf. And again, we need to kind of have that mindset even with reintegration. We're here to help them. We're here to give them support and help them move forward. But we're not going to rescue them. We're not going to make everything better, but we're going to do everything we can to help that situation and make them get them back on their feet. It takes many steps to get them completely out of that situation. If you help them take one step, you make a difference. It takes an average of 7 to 11 times for a victim to leave trafficking. So we have to be patient and empathetic with them. And we have to know and understand and recognize that they will sometimes go back into that life. And that's a very sad situation and it's difficult, but know that we have helped them. They know that there's an option. They know that there's another way out. And anytime that we can provide them that knowledge, we're helping them in some way. Only 1 to 2% of those who fall victim to trafficking are rescued and actually fully get out of that lifestyle. And then it's just really one of the phrases that was said to me at a conference once was, choice looks a lot different if you don't have any choices. And I think that's something that we really have to recognize, is that they don't feel like they have a choice. They don't feel like there's another way out. So that just looks a lot different in their situation. I bring up reporting. This isn't so much a situation here, but I think it's important to know reporting and what it can and can't be. So adult victims have to consent to reporting. And I would say the grand majority don't. They don't want to report to police. And so in the medical field, there's specific situations allowed by HIPAA, which is the Privacy Act, where we can report that. But for the most part, any adult victim has to consent. Law enforcement gets called in the agency where the crime took place, not necessarily where the patient is or victim is found, but where the crime originally took place. This was the wording that Olathe Health used. And I don't expect you to know all of this, but some of the things that I like to highlight in here: individuals under the age of 18 cannot consent to commercial sex acts. Law enforcement must be notified. And that included any exchange for sex with a minor, not just monetary, trading for drugs, shelter, clothing, phones as examples. And then the adult victims that we were able to contact authorities on, just whether they agreed or not, was a vulnerable or elderly adult unable to care for themselves or protect their own interests. So if there is an adult over the age of 18, but say they have the mental capacity, like we talked about the other girl, she was younger, but if it was a 20-year-old, but only had the mental capacity of a 2-year-old, that's somebody that's unable to care for themselves. And in that situation, we would also call. So it's kind of important to know the differences there when medical individuals might report to police, when they wouldn't. That is not going to be as significant in the reintegration part, but I think it's good to know the background and how that takes place. The only other time, and this is the same with domestic violence, I think it's kind of interesting for individuals to know, the only other time an adult victim that we could contact police, and this is for domestic violence or human trafficking, was if somebody had been injured them by the use of a firearm or sharp instrument such as a knife that was capable of inflicting serious wounds. So it was the same with domestic violence. If we had an individual that had been beaten and we could tell they had, and even if they said that their husband beat them, we could not call the authorities unless they agreed to it, unless they were injured by a firearm or sharp instrument. So basically a knife or a firearm. And I just think it's interesting for individuals out there to know that we are held to certain requirements in the medical field. We would like to report more than we're actually able to. But again, a good majority of the individuals that get out of the situation don't report to the authorities at all, but there are agencies that are able to help. So reporting human trafficking, in Kansas, it's DCF, which is Department of Children and Families, the FBI office. So at Children's, anyone under 18, they immediately called the FBI. And in Missouri, there's the Missouri Department of Social Services, which is similar to or the equivalent of DCF in Kansas. Victim assistance. So something that if you would run into a situation where you were able to provide somebody with some information that may need it, the Human Trafficking Network is available 24/7. They have both the hotline that people can call, as well as they can text help or info to Be Free. And their text line is really becoming a lot more popular because it's a little bit easier for individuals to text maybe than to have a conversation. So their text line is actually that Be Free 233-733, and somebody can send them just asking for info or help, and they will provide them with local resources. I like to also tell individuals about this because if you ever have a question about something with human trafficking or something that you're seeing or concerned about, you can always call them. I called them just to see, and ask what resources they provide, and they were happy to answer those kinds of questions. So they're a really good resource. The other organization to know about in the Kansas City metro area is MOXA, which is the Metropolitan Organization to Counter Sexual Assault. They are available 24/7. Anyone that's being seen for a sexual assault in the hospital will also have a MOXA representative. And MOXA does a lot of great things. They help provide that individual follow up with mental health agencies. They're there if they do a sexual assault exam. It's a pretty intensive exam if somebody is sexually assaulted, and they stay there with them through the whole thing. They may utilize that advocate even when they go to court. They kind of stay with them through everything from beginning to end. So they're a really great agency to help victims as well. You will talk a little bit more about this in one of the other talks that you have, but just some of the effective response things, just making sure that we're meeting their basic needs, assessing their safety risks. You always want to establish rapport, assure them that you're there to help and you care about them. Building trust is number one. There's a lot of things on this slide, but really just building trust with that individual. And that starts very simply with always, I'll talk about it a little bit on the next slide, but assuring them that you're going to maintain their confidentiality. You'll only tell required things. If there is something, like I said, for us in the medical field, that's if they're under 18, we have to report that, things like that, that you're going to give them referrals. You're there to help. Really, it's just helping them move from feeling powerless and hopeless to regaining trust with someone. And that takes time. They're very, survivors are not likely to trust others very easily. So first of all, we're going to start by believing what they say. And in the hospital setting, that was often hard for individuals. One of the individuals I took care of was a male, and the physician assistant that went and talked to him, he said, "Oh, his story is just outrageous. There's no way that that's actually true." And it was. And I actually looked at the physician assistant and I said, the more unlikely his story is, the more I am likely to believe him. Unfortunately, the stories that you hear are outrageous and unbelievable, that things that happen to individuals. And so we have to believe what they say. We want to always let them know they're safe. Always respect the no. And that's the biggest way to build trust. If they say no, they don't want something, then you respect that. We want to always give them back control when possible. In the hospital situation, that always looked like giving them an appropriate space or a male or female provider. But if they specifically don't want to talk to you, then you offer somebody else to talk to them. We're always going to respect their wishes when we can and allow them to have as much control as possible. It's something that's been taken away from them completely. So when you give them any amount of control, it starts to let them feel like they can trust you. And it starts to build their confidence back when they can have some control. Acknowledge their bravery in talking to you. Thank them for trusting you. Always, like I said, assure them of confidentiality. Let them know what resources you're available to provide to them. Don't pressure them for information. And when I spent time at a crisis house with individuals, just letting them talk and listening to them instead of trying to ask them questions, they're much more willing to open up and chat with you. And you just have to be aware that sometimes what they're telling you is going to be very uncomfortable, and you just have to kind of step through that. It's difficult at times, though. Always remain focused and stay calm, utilizing appropriate terminology. So instead of utilizing the word trafficking, which in the situation of reintegration, they now know that word. In the hospital, they wouldn't always know that. So we would talk about trading sex for things. They don't see themselves as victim. Mirror their terminology. So if they call their trafficker their boyfriend, then you use that term. Whatever term they are using, we try to mirror that terminology and respect that. This is a little bit more, again, about environment and hospital, but providing for their comfort. Some of these things are regardless of the situation or where they're at. For us, it was utilizing professional interpreters, making sure that they have private space. We're going to sit below them. We don't want to ever stand or hover over them and feel where they're out of control. So those are just a few of those things. Again, you'll get more of that information. And that is, I did pretty good, 750. I don't know how fast I talked, but it's a pretty heavy subject. We've just kind of highlighted some of the information about human trafficking and some of the awareness things. So know that can be pretty heavy. When I first started learning about this, I would be able to go to a lecture and then I would have to step away for several days or weeks from the information and just kind of absorb that, because it is very heavy and can be very hard on your heart at times, especially if you're a really empathetic person. And so just realize that you may feel a little bit more of a heaviness tonight. Talk about that if you need to. I'm sure Rachel is happy to talk to you, and I'll give you my phone number. You're always welcome to call me as well. There's my phone number and my email address, and I'm always happy to provide information or talk things out with somebody if needed. So, and then the rest of my slides are references, which nobody wants to see. So I know I kind of talked through all that, but I want to